one. Thank you so much, Brie, for joining us here at the Dwelling Show. I really appreciate your time. So I just can't wait to get right into the show.
Great. Thanks for having me.
So let's just do it. So real quick, I know you buy 2 to 4 units specifically. So can you just kind of tell us how you got started, or just an example of a 2 to 4 unit that you purchased?
Sure. Yeah. I own all my properties are 2 to 4 units. I do have 1 6-unit, but I've never owned any single families or condos. And the reason being, it really came down to the housing stock. So I invest in Chicago and Milwaukee, and in those cities, they're very dense urban environments. So in the areas that I invest, typically between 50 and 70% of all the houses in those areas are 2 to 4 unit properties. So that's why it made sense. Now, I've looked in other markets. I think there's very few cities in the country that are set up this way. So like New York would be an example, Boston's an example, Chicago, Milwaukee, San Francisco, all of those cities are set up like that. So it's a way to still get A, B type tenants and not sacrifice on tenant class and be able to buy a income producing asset.
Fantastic. So you've got this like really sweet spot, right? The 2 to 4 unit, like you said, based on the market that you're in.
Mm-hmm.
So if somebody's in that same situation and they want to do pretty much what you've done, what would you say were the challenges that you faced, and how did you kind of overcome those challenges?
Well, the biggest challenge from anyone that's used to single families or condos and trying to get into 2 to 4s is you don't realize that tenant relations comes into play. When you're renting out a single family house, like there's no one else in that building to cause problems. But when you've got 2 to 4 units, we've run into situations at certain points. So I just had this happen to my 3-unit. The tenants, my basement had been there for 5 years. My other tenant was, I think, 3.5. My other tenant was 4.5. And they all lived there for a really long time. They all got along. Then the basement tenant just started being a dick. Like he was. I mean, like he would get mail in his mailbox, and instead of putting it in their mailbox, he would throw it away. Or like someone would get a package and he would just like kick it outside instead of leaving it in the common area. And it got to like a point, I remember it was a Friday night, like one tenant texted me, and then like 5 minutes later, another tenant emailed me. And then like 10 minutes later, I got a phone call. I'm like, what is going on? And it hit a head at a certain point where I had to essentially be a mother. And I'm like, okay, everyone email me what's going on, like the full story. And then I had to go back and email them all back and like, here's the rules, right? If you can't follow these rules, I will let you out of your lease. And luckily the tenant that was being a problem, he found somewhere else quite quickly. And I let him out of his lease because I would rather lose him than lose my other 2 good long-term tenants. So that's definitely a challenge you don't see in single family houses.
That is fun. That is like fascinating. Yeah. Yeah. I wasn't expecting that at all.
Or like washers and dryers is also an issue. Like it was the same thing. Like, someone would leave their clothes in the washing machine. He needed to do laundry. So he would take it out and throw it on the floor, right. So that was the only time I've really had to get like super, super involved. But there was another time we had tenants in Milwaukee that weren't getting along. And it got to the point where one tenant had set up like exterior video cameras and had like recorded the tenant was like throwing trash from their second story down to the first story, and then like leaving it there for a few days. And like she had like recorded this all and like sent me video, and it was going back and forth, like he said, she said, and finally got to the point, I'm like, you know what? I'm canceling both your leases. Like, I don't care who's right and who's wrong. Neither of you have showed me that you're good tenants and people that I really want to deal with. So let's just vacate the whole building and then get new tenants in there, because I don't know who's right and I don't care at this point.
It's really interesting, right? Like when I hear sometimes and people are like, I want to invest in real estate, and then I want like passive income, and I just want to be like completely hands off. And it's kind of interesting because, such stories that as you're telling us, people don't even think of that when, they're thinking of getting into real estate. Like they don't think they have to like actually solve issues between tenants, right? It's not something we think about, right?
If you want passive income, you would invest in private notes. That's about what you're doing. Anything else is not passive. I've had 3 different managers that manage a variety of my assets, and it's still not hands off. It's still not passive.
Interesting. So you mentioned you've got stuff in Milwaukee. I know that you have, some other properties out of state. So
Mhm.
you're based in Chicago, but you have all these other investments in different cities and states. How do you do that?
That's a great question. How I do it now is a lot different than how I did it before. So I've been investing. I looked at about 4.5 years ago is when I started looking at doing Milwaukee. I bought my first property up there about almost 4 years ago. And for the first 2 years, I was up there pretty much every week. I had my own, and I built my own in-house property management team. We bought what 27 properties in 18 months. So we scaled quite quickly, and I had been working a lot on like systems, processes, right? Especially when you're scaling that quickly. And after about 2 years, I realized that my time of going up there, it's only an hour and a half drive one way. But when you're driving 3 hours round trip at least once a week, it was very time consuming. So after about 2 years, I hired out property management, and went with two different companies that do their own. So like I'm a piece of their puzzle essentially. But it gave me more time back. So now I'm up there maybe once a quarter, and it's way more passive than it used to be. But it was a rough couple of years. But it also taught me, right? I think one of the strengths I have with my managers is I also manage that portfolio myself with an in-house local guy. So I know when I'm asking them to bend over backwards for me, and I know when I'm asking them to do something that should have been done 3 days ago. So, I'm more realistic about expectations. So if they call me and say, hey, like we can't get to it like this weekend, it's the last weekend of the month. I don't call them the last week of the month unless it's something that's an emergency, because they're busy doing turnovers. They've got tenants moving out, tenants moving in. That should be their priority. So I don't push them for anything during those time periods. And I'm aware of that because I had to self-manage, and I had to do, 6 new move-ins in one weekend. That sucks. So, I said, unless there's a burst pipe, I don't even call them.
Right, right. So, I hate to bring this topic, but a lot of women listening to this, maybe stay-at-home moms, or just somebody thinking of starting this and being like Brie, and they're like, well, I'm not sure if the contractors or if the property managers will listen to me, because they might think I don't really know. Did you find that to be true on the field, or is that just something that we think is happening?
Not specifically because I was a woman, but I think that by the time I started Milwaukee, I already had a foundation. I'd already owned properties in Chicago. I was already quite successful. I already knew things. So I never felt that I was being judged differently because I'm a woman. But it's important to know these things. And I'll give you an example because it's just happened. My PM sent me a bill with a furnace. I know more about furnaces than anyone ever should. But I look at the bill, and they replaced, so I'll be technical, but they replaced a flame sensor, a thermocouple, and a blower. And I pushed back and said, why did you replace these things? And they're like, what do you mean? I'm like, well, if the furnace was blowing cold air, you would replace the flame sensor or the thermocouple. But if it wasn't blowing air, you would replace the blower. So when you send me this bill, you're essentially telling me that you sent an idiot over there who just started fixing stuff, right, to figure out what the problem was. Like, those two things are completely unrelated. And it took them like 2 months to get back to me about why they did that. But I have that knowledge, right, to be able to push back and say, this doesn't make any sense. I know this kind of stuff. Another example would be, I had a tenant call me a couple months ago and say, my dishwasher broke. Well, anyone would think like, okay, I'll call the dishwasher repairman. But because I've been a landlord, because I know this stuff, I'd asked, where is it backing up? And they had told me it's backing up into the kitchen sink. Well, I know that means that there's a clog between the kitchen and the dishwasher. It's not the dishwasher. So I called a plumber, not a dishwasher repairman, and got it fixed. But if you didn't know those kind of things, you would have wasted your time calling a dishwasher repairman who would have come out and said the dishwasher works fine. And then you would have to call a plumber anyways. So it's those little things that I know, based on my experience, that keeps me on the ball about my business. So I think that's super important for anyone to know, regardless of if you're a man or a woman.
Wow, that's really, really interesting. So like, just education through experience is kind of what's helped you, because, I don't even know that much about, furnaces, for example, right? So
Yeah.
that's like, yeah, that's really, really interesting. So
when you're
Sorry.
not so when you're not physically there, you're trusting the person that you hired to run your business. And if I love like I said, I love my property managers. They're great people, but you give them an inch, they take a mile, right? And if you're not pushing back on certain things and double checking stuff, right? It's human nature, right? Oh, so and so lets me get away with it, so I'm just going to keep doing this, right? And it's a hard business to be in for a lot of people. I don't find it with my property managers, but I've heard millions of stories where, you don't double check your work and then they just start billing you and then they're, skimming money off the top, and you need to be educated enough to push back on those things.
So let's go back a little bit. I remember reading, I remember listening to your podcast episode, and also reading your post about you quitting your job, I think 4 years ago.
About 4 years ago.
So how was that decision like for you? I mean, when some people listening to this, some dual listeners thinking, oh my goodness, I'm so scared. Like, how do you quit your job?
It was scary. It was very scary. I was lucky enough that my husband was working and we had built enough rental income that we could get by without my income for a while. So it definitely was scary. It's been interesting. I work probably more than I did before in corporate. And I'm just the kind of person, I thought I would be that person that just like chills in cafes and reads books. I'm like, I'm retired. I'm going to run my portfolio. This is going to be easy. And in the last 4 years, I've started 4 new businesses. So whenever I get bored or, things are operationally efficient, I just seem to get myself in another project that takes up all my time. So that's just kind of the person that I am. But it's been fun. I mean, I'm actually writing a blog series right now about it, because the first 2 years I was working like 80 hours a week. And then I kind of had to sit back and be like, listen, this is not what I wanted to do. I wanted to be passive, but I also love what I do. So it's a different, I don't hate getting up in the morning. I don't hate doing things. So I've been working towards a 30-hour work week for about 2 years now, and making changes in my business. So one of those was not having to go up to Milwaukee anymore. Right. And that was a big impact in my business. I don't take in-person meetings. Right. I stack my days. There are certain things that I do now to get me down to a 30-hour work week. So I'm still able to run. I've got 8 different companies and 5 different areas of business, all within real estate, that I now pretty much, depending on the week, only work 30 hours a week.
Wow, that's like amazing. Congratulations. That sounds like a ton of activities that you're trying to like squeeze down. So what would you tell your 10 years younger self, right? Maybe,
God.
yeah, maybe you were working at the time and you were like, I can't wait to quit my job so I can just like chill in cafes and read books. But having that like perspective now, what would you tell your 10 years younger self?
Well, my 10 years younger self was 24. And at that point, I didn't hate my job. I actually never really hated my job. I loved my job. I had spent almost 10 years building my career. And I always wanted to be a corporate executive. So I was in advertising sales, like that's what I wanted. So it wasn't necessarily that like, oh my gosh, I hate going to work every day. But my 24-year-old self should have saved more money. My 24-year-old self definitely should have realized, right, what's important financially. And so when I worked in a sales company, and it was you had a bunch of 20-year-olds with 6-figure incomes. And it was very, like, who's got the new Jimmy Choos and who's got the new Louis Vuitton purse? It was one of those like environments. And I spent so much money on stupid clothes and like just stupid things like that. So I wish I would have been smarter and not cared about that sort of stuff, and then started building a bigger nest egg from an earlier age. I didn't really have that financial literacy at 24.
Right. Is the shiny syndrome, shining object syndrome, sorry.
Yeah.
And trying to impress others, I guess.
Yep, it is. I think that's something that just maybe the thing I love about real estate investors in general is that it's a lifestyle. It's not just like a job. It's a lifestyle. And a lot of us have that same mentality. My car is a 2010 and it's got like 52,000 miles on it. I barely drive. But when I met my husband, he drove a Lincoln. He's like, wait, how do you make way more money than I do, but you drive a really shitty car? And he used to he pushed back on me for like the first few months we were dating. Like, I don't understand why you drive a shitty car. Like, it's not shitty. It's got 52,000 miles on it. I put the key in, it turns on, right? I can fit a bathtub in my car. I can fit a 6-foot ladder in my car, and I don't have car payments, right? There's better things for me to spend my money on than a nice car. And it's that mentality that I didn't develop until my late 20s, early 30s of, what is financially important for you.
Fascinating. So as much as I want to keep going, well, before we actually go into the quick round, I'm just just out of interest, could you go through one of your favorite deals in terms of the numbers, and how did you find the deal and how did you fund it? Just anyone.
Oh gosh, they're all kind of my favorites. I've never sold a property, so they're all kind of my favorites. Well, I think it depends, right? Because when I started in Milwaukee, I was heavily reliant on the MLS. It was a buyer's market. It wasn't a seller's market. And then I just started asking people questions. So I guess my favorite story would be the first property I bought in Milwaukee. It was a 3-unit. We wanted to go do a showing. We had an agent. And I really liked the agent that had met us there to list the property. We walked into the unit and he was asking the tenants about how their kid's soccer game was. And then we walked into another unit and he was like, oh, my wife wanted that recipe you said that you were going to give us. He just had they were good, solid tenants. He had a good rapport with his tenants. And so when we walked out of the property, I'd asked him, I'm like, are you the agent or the owner? Well, he's like, I'm actually both. I'm like, listen, I really like this property. I like how you deal with your tenants. Do you have any more to sell? And it turns out he didn't, but his family did. So the first 7 properties I bought were off of his family off market. So I just started asking people, and like I said, I was at a restaurant once and I heard these guys talking about a duplex. So I went over and interrupted their lunch and was like, do you have a duplex to sell? So the last, dozen or so properties I've bought have all been off market. Through agents or through people I've worked with. Whenever I buy a property from a seller, I send them a letter asking them hey, would you mind talking about why you're selling, so I can learn, right? What mistakes you made, I want to learn from that. But also, do you have anything else to sell? So a lot of my properties I've bought from the same sellers multiple times.
Wow, fascinating. I really like that, sending a letter to a seller after you buy the property. That's really cool.
I do. And I've learned a lot of my learning lessons have come from that, right? Once they've already sold it, they just don't care. So I'll ask them what would you have done differently? And sometimes they're just tired. But I've learned a lot of lessons and how to avoid the same pitfalls by talking to these sellers and asking them why did you sell? And it's helped me run my business more efficiently and ramp up my learning faster.
Wow. Now we're definitely dwelling into the quick round. So these are going to be quick questions, quick answers. So first question, what makes you, Brie, unique? What is that differentiating factor that separates you from the next girl or the next guy?
Oh, I don't know. I don't do anything special. I really don't. I don't do anything special. I guess I'm unique in the way that I have a passion for real estate. It consumes my mind no matter if I'm working on a project or not. And I'm lucky enough to have the opportunity to do what I love every day.
Fascinating. Second question. What was the last book that you read, and what was the one thing that you picked from that book?
I've been really bad about reading books. I used to be really good at it. I think the one that I remember the most is Getting Things Done. Getting Things Done is an organizational method. Brandon Turner recommended it to me, and I've been following that method for 2.5 years. And that's been one of the most impactful things of getting down to a 30-hour work week is using that book and that method of organization.
Fascinating. I don't think I've heard that one. Final question. You've got, properties in Milwaukee. You've got your 2 to 4 units. You've got speaking engagements. I think I know you were at Joe's conference. So you've got a ton of stuff going on. Mm-hmm. Family, obviously. What do you do for fun?
That's a great question. Work is kind of fun for me. So again, I do enjoy it. For fun, we do motorcycle rides. So in the summers, especially in Chicago, we'll take off probably 2 days a week and just go take the motorcycle out. Restaurants, plays, and then I'm super big about travel. That's kind of one of the reasons why I got into this business, was to be able to afford those things like travel. So I try to take anywhere from 8 to 10 weeks off a year and travel.
Fascinating. Nice. I like it.
And then
Well,
speaking of engagements, we have the Midwest Real Estate Networking Summit is my newest project, because God forbid I actually have a lull over the winter. So we're planning a 3-day conference for everything real estate investors in Chicago, May 11th through the 13th. And then our website is midwestresummit.com.
awesome. Thank you so much for letting us know that. Thank you. So if there's somebody listening to this, and they're like, wow, I like this Brie person. I like what she's saying. How can people connect with you? Where are you most active?
Best ways to connect, I said, you can connect with me through the midwestresummit.com website. Also my brokerage website, because I actually own my own brokerage company. So I work with investors in Chicago to acquire 2 to 4 unit properties. That website is Second City, spelled out, -re.com, or on bigger.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Brie. I know you got stuff to do. I really, really appreciate your time today. Thank you so much.
Thanks.